The sky over Karth Ridge was red with fire and screaming metal. Missiles streaked through the upper clouds like shattered comet tails, and every inch of ground below shivered beneath the weight of war. Human forces pushed uphill, trudging through broken supply lines and fields littered with the carcasses of drones, collapsed artillery walkers, and burned-out med tanks. The Threx Dominion, alien conquerors of 100 systems, had finally been driven back to their final stronghold, and at its broken heart lay Queen Xeroxa, face down in the dirt, her crimson armor cracked and glowing faintly with dying energy. She had once stood 12 feet tall, her horns crowned with obsidian filigree, voice sharp enough to command legions. But now, with one leg mangled, her breathing labored, and a plasma wound across her lower torso leaking iridescent blood, she was just a body on a battlefield waiting to be finished. Her elite guard had scattered in retreat. The palace above had fallen in silence. The banner of the Dominion lay torn across the remnants of a bunker, flapping weakly in the ash-filled wind. Dane Ryle, Corporal First Class of Earth's 5th Recon, was not supposed to be there. He'd been separated from his unit an hour ago during a bad jump. The last thing he remembered was screaming through smoke in a half-burned drop sled, then waking up under a collapsed communication tower with ringing ears and a broken rifle. He had one working comm bead, a field blade, and a limp in his left leg. When he first saw her, he didn't recognize her. She was half buried under fallen debris, her cloak drenched in mud, one arm twitching. Then her eyes opened. They were silver. Not dull, not dim. Alive. She looked at him, not like a commander, not like a queen, but like a creature who expected death and was almost disappointed it hadn't come yet. He raised his blade out of reflex. She didn't flinch. Her lips moved. The translator in his ear barely kept up. "Kill me, or carry me." He hesitated. The battle was over. The Dominion was defeated. Every soldier had orders to leave or destroy high-value enemy assets for tribunal extraction. She was the highest, the last queen of a crumbling empire. But there was something in her voice, something not like the others he'd fought. She wasn't begging, she was challenging him. He knelt slowly, tested her wounds, the fracture in her hip, the gash through her abdominal plating, a cracked spine module at the base of her armor. She should have been dead already. "You're not going to make it unless someone walks you out of here," he muttered. She laughed once, bitter and sharp. "You barely walk yourself." Dane grinned. "I've carried worse." He braced her under his arms and pulled her up inch by inch until her full weight slumped over his shoulders. She was twice his size. Her breathing rasped against his back. Her blood soaked into his uniform. And then he took his first step toward the horizon. 1 mile. Just one. But that first step was where the legend began. By mile 3, the storm hit. Lightning didn't crack so much as explode, sheets of electric blue arcing between twisted columns of smoke. The air was thick with carbon and sulfur. Visibility dropped to 0. Dane could barely see the next 10 feet in front of him. He kept his eyes low, focused on the pattern of his steps, each one sinking into mud laced with bone and metal. Xeroxa groaned now and then, her arm limp over his shoulder, her weight shifting unpredictably as he adjusted her bulk. She was burning up. Her alien physiology wasn't made for exposure like this. Her body needed a stasis pod, heat regulation, plasma transfusion. Instead, she had a soldier with half a medkit and a busted knee. But she never asked him to stop. Around mile 7, a scouting drone spotted them. It hovered low, blinking red. "Enemy tech," Threx made. Dane ducked instinctively, shielding her body, but the drone only scanned, chirped, then hovered away. He glanced over his shoulder. Her eyes were closed. He wasn't sure if she was conscious. "Hey," he muttered, "you still in there?" No answer. He reached into his coat, pulled out a stim patch, and slapped it against the exposed part of her collarbone. She flinched and hissed. He grinned. "Thought so." By mile 15, his legs began to tremble. Every joint ached. Her breathing was shallow but steady now, like her body was starting to trust that death wouldn't find her just yet. Once he tripped and rolled down a slope, landing hard against a pile of debris. She groaned in pain as her frame hit the ground beside him. He crawled toward her, half broken, cursing. "Sorry, I forgot you don't bounce." Her eyes opened again, weak but lucid. "You should have left me." He looked at her, grime and blood on his face. "I don't leave people. Not even alien queens with attitude problems." She blinked slowly, then said something in a dialect his translator didn't catch. He didn't ask. He just hauled her back up. By mile 20, the sun broke through the clouds. It wasn't much, a sliver of gold across a sea of ash, but it painted her silver skin in light for the first time. She looked less like a monster and more like a woman made of starlight and fury. Dane paused, wiped his brow, and whispered, "You don't even know how close you came to dying." Her voice came soft from behind him. "You don't know how close you came to being chosen." He didn't understand what she meant, but something in the way she said it made his heart beat faster. So he kept walking, and behind them the battlefield fell away as two enemies left it together, not with blood, not with triumph, but with something far stranger. Trust. They crossed into the unpatrolled buffer zone by nightfall of the second day, trudging beneath the broken remains of satellite towers and the skeletal husks of orbital drop pods. The forest they entered was burned down to blackened roots, its air thick with electromagnetic residue and scorched ion particles. It was death without glory, an unmarked stretch of war-churned wilderness where nothing survived for long, not even memories. Every step Dane took was a promise to a body that had long stopped listening. Shiraxa had gone quiet again, not unconscious. He could tell by the way her claws twitched against his chest when he stumbled, or the faint hiss of pain she let out when his grip shifted wrong over the cracked edge of her spine. But she had retreated inward, the way soldiers do when they know there's nothing to control but their breathing. He'd seen it before. In humans, in comrades, in people who were afraid to die but too proud to say it. That's when the blood fever started. Her physiology, alien and not meant for prolonged exposure outside of regenerative fields, began to reject its own internal chemistry. Her breath turned ragged, her core temperature spiked. Her body tensed in spasms against him, as if fighting invisible chains. Dane set her down beside a burnt-out husk of a land carrier and pulled off his jacket, his shirt soaked with her blood. He used what was left of his ration water to cool her face, dabbing it against the silver lining of her cheekbone. She grabbed his wrist, fast and strong, and looked him straight in the eye. "You're carrying a dying god." He met her gaze without flinching. "You're heavy for a god." She bared her teeth in a half-snarl, half-smile. "I should crush you for that. You want to do that after I walk 60 miles with you or before?" She blinked, then lay back, and said nothing. He took that as a win. As the fever surged again, she trembled beneath his arms, and for the first time since he picked her up, he wasn't sure he could hold her together. Her body convulsed with something that looked like pain, but smelled like fire, her breath coming in harsh, guttural snarls. Dane held her tight and pressed his forehead against hers. "You hold on," he whispered. "You hold on, or I'll drag your unconscious, glowing ass to the medical base and make sure they stuff you in a glass case marked Royal Survivor. You're not dying here. Not on me." She blinked slowly. "No human has ever touched me." He brushed a trembling strand of her braided crown back from her face. "Then consider this your first miracle." By morning, the fever broke. She was still alive, and though she said nothing when he picked her back up and carried her again, her arms wrapped, ever so slightly, around his neck to hold on. Not as a queen, not as a prisoner, but as someone who wasn't ready to let go of the man who refused to let her fall. The final stretch was the worst. The ridgeline of Ardent's Pass was 20 clicks of jagged stone teeth, flanked by deep canyons that howled with magnetic winds strong enough to strip plating from supply crawlers. No drones flew this far anymore. The sky was thick with blackbirds, the kind that fed on cooling corpses. Dane climbed it anyway, 1 foot at a time, boots scraping against the loose shale as Shiraxa's weight leaned against his shoulders like a second life demanding breath. At mile 55, his vision blurred. By mile 57, he was barely speaking, only muttering half-formed sentences to keep himself from passing out. "You know, you're not even my type. Don't know why I'm doing this, but hell, it feels right. Used to carry a wounded sergeant through a minefield. He complained less than you." Shiraxa didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her breathing had changed, slower, smoother. Her blood no longer poured. It pulsed, thick and slow beneath his grip. Somehow she was stabilizing, but he was not. His legs gave out 2 kilometers from the old Allied outpost, the last working checkpoint before medevac range. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, his ribs screaming from fatigue, his arms locking under her to keep from slamming her into the ground. He coughed once, hard enough to taste blood. Shiraxa opened her eyes and looked down at him for the first time from above. And what she saw was not pity. It was awe. "You," she croaked, voice like cracked stone. "You carried me through fire and storm. You gave me your heat, your breath, your strength. You could have handed me to your kind and been celebrated." He looked up, too exhausted to even blink. "I didn't carry a queen. I carried someone who needed saving." For a long moment she said nothing, then her hand, taloned and burned, cupped the side of his face. She leaned down close enough that he could smell the stardust scent of her skin, close enough that he could feel her heart thudding against his chest. "I claim you," she whispered, his brow furrowed, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," she murmured, "you are mine now, soldier." He laughed, half choked, half delirious. "Could have at least waited till I wasn't bleeding." She kissed his forehead, and then, with a strength that shocked them both, she lifted him, her arms still weak, her legs trembling, but she carried him the last 2 kilometers in silence. The checkpoint lit up with alarms. The medics came running, and no one could quite process what they saw. The alien queen, long thought slain or captured, carrying the human who had saved her like a sacred relic from a forgotten myth. He passed out in her arms. And the last thing he heard, before the world went black, was her whispering to the medics, "Touch him without permission, and I will end your bloodline." Dane awoke in a world of white light and sterile silence. Medical panels blinked gently above his head, and clean sheets pressed against his chest like unfamiliar skin. He moved slowly, soreness layered deep into muscle, bone, and marrow, and let out a groan that startled the nurse at his bedside. She dropped her datapad and stumbled backward, not from his movement, but from something beyond his reach. Dane followed her gaze. There, in the far corner of the medical tent, stood Queen Shiraxa, alive, upright, and terrifying. Her frame, though still bandaged and wrapped in a mesh of regenerative nanoweave, held the full regal weight of who she had once been. Her horns had been repolished by someone, and her eyes glowed faintly with the hue of returning vitality. She wore no crown, no insignia, only a long black cloak trimmed in broken stitching. It looked as if it had been sewn from battlefield scraps. And her focus, unflinching, was on him. "You should not be awake," she said in a voice that cut through silence like a knife across velvet. "Neither should you." Dane rasped back, his voice hoarse. "I regenerate faster. Show off." A flicker crossed her face, not quite a smile, not quite amusement. Something else, familiarity? She stepped forward. 2 guards outside tried to follow, but she raised her hand and they froze mid-step. This wasn't diplomacy, it wasn't a delegation. This was hers, and she was making it known. Shiraxa reached the foot of his bed, standing above him like a mountain dressed in grace. Her silver skin bore no expression, but Dane had spent enough time carrying her to understand the small things, the slight lean forward, the way her claws flexed unconsciously, the way her breathing slowed when she focused. He tried to sit up, but she raised a single claw and said, "Stay." He did. Not because he feared her, but because for once, it felt like the right word to hear. "You carried me," she said, 60 miles, through death, through betrayal, through fire. "I remember," he said softly. "Why?" He didn't answer at first. Then he looked at her with the wariness of someone who had lost too many answers to too many graves. "Because someone should have." She tilted her head. "And you thought that someone should be you?" "I didn't think," he said. "I just did." That silence again. She moved to the side of his bed, slower this time. There was no menace in her steps, only gravity. She lowered herself into the chair beside him with an elegance that came not from royalty, but from restraint. "I made a decision while you were unconscious," she said. "Oh good," he muttered. "Royal decrees make excellent bedside reading." "I'm not returning to the throne," she continued, ignoring his sarcasm. "My court fractured. My generals fled. The blood right was abandoned. There is nothing for me to reclaim." He frowned. "Then why are you still here?" She turned to face him, eyes like twin moons over a dark sea. "I am here for you." His heartbeat jumped. She leaned forward slightly, and her voice dropped just above a whisper. "You carried me 60 miles, Dane Ryle. Not as a soldier, not as a trophy, but as a person. No one has ever done that. Not for me, not ever. I didn't expect anything in return, he said, trying not to shrink beneath the weight of her truth. She smiled. A rare, haunted thing, but you'll get something anyway. He blinked. What? Her claws touched the edge of the bed. Me. The Allied Interspecies Council had not been so full since the day of surrender. High domes of glass and marble stretched over a gathering of over 80 civilizations, each representative cloaked in the regalia of their race. Floating platforms orbited the center of the chamber like drifting moons, filled with translators, guards, diplomats, and monitors broadcasting across 500 systems. Dane Ryle stood at the center, not in uniform, not in chains, just a plain black tunic, worn boots, and a faint scar along his jaw that hadn't healed properly. Behind him, a wall of humans, admirals, soldiers, politicians. Half of them argued for commendation, the other half whispered of protocol violations, court-martials, unauthorized contact with an enemy high-value target. It didn't matter, not anymore, because beside him, towering and silent, stood Queen Xeroxa. She wore a ceremonial wrap that shimmered with the starlight of her lost homeworld, her armor carved into elegant symmetry, polished to obsidian gleam. Her presence caused a full platform of minor diplomats to shrink into their seats. She had not asked to speak. She had simply arrived. The chairman began the hearing. Corporal Dane Ryle is to be evaluated for his conduct in direct contradiction of wartime policy. Specifically, the rescue and transportation of Queen Xeroxa, former leader of the Threx Dominion. Do you have anything to say in your defense, soldier? Dane glanced to the side. Xeroxa said nothing. He stepped forward. I carried her because I couldn't watch another life die in the dirt. The chamber murmured. He continued, voice steady now. I didn't see a crown. I didn't see an enemy. I saw a wounded person who'd been left behind. I made a call. I stand by it. A representative from the Cyrilite Confederacy barked. That act could have reignited the war. She could have killed me with her bare hands when we were halfway there, Dane replied. She didn't. Another murmuring wave. Then Xeroxa moved, without permission, without preamble. She stepped forward until she stood beside Dane, then slightly in front of him, shielding him from the gaze of 1,000 judging eyes. I invoke the binding right of Valthana, she said. A gasp rolled through the chamber. Is that a threat? One senator shouted. No, she said calmly. It is a proposal. Dane looked at her stunned. The binding right was not a political tool, sacred. It was sacred, a lifelong vow between two beings made under the eyes of all who watched, recognized by every system and species bound to interstellar law. You're proposing to me? He asked in a low breath. She turned her head slightly. I already claimed you, remember? I thought you were joking. She didn't blink. I never joke. The room broke into chaos. But neither of them moved, and as alarms rang and debates rose and the galaxy tried to process what was unfolding, Dane simply took her hand. Calm, firm, human, and said, I accept. They gave him a room in the high chambers of the diplomatic quarter, walled with translucent mineral glass and overlooking the city's upper horizon. From there, Dane could see the stars curve with the orbital arc, like a river of frost on black silk. Below, domes shimmered with light and movement, councils arguing, fleets realigning, entire nations digesting what had happened just hours ago. A human soldier and an alien queen had invoked the right, in front of the universe. He sat by the open panel window in silence, still wearing the formal tunic, its collar loosened and sleeves rolled. He hadn't spoken since the hearing. The gravity of it all pressed against his chest heavier than any armor he'd worn. Then the door slid open. Xeroxa entered without sound, draped in midnight silk, no longer armored. Her form was fluid, graceful, unburdened by the weapons she used to carry like limbs. Her horns were unbound, cascading back behind her like twin arcs of obsidian glass. She paused just past the threshold and studied him, eyes unreadable. You didn't run, she said. Thought about it, Dane replied without looking. I even got as far as thinking what I'd pack. She stepped further in. Why didn't you? He exhaled. Because every time I imagine leaving, I see you bleeding in the dirt, and every time I imagine staying, I see you standing beside me like you did today. There was a long pause. Then her voice softened. You do not speak like a soldier. I stopped being one the moment I chose to save you instead of kill you. Her breath caught, not visibly, but he heard it. That subtle shift in her throat, that slight tremble of muscle. She walked to the center of the room and sat across from him, legs crossed, back straight, hands resting on her knees in ceremonial posture. "I know you don't understand what the right means in my culture," she said. "I don't think I even understand what it means in mine anymore," he admitted. "In my world," she continued, "the right is not romance. It is not possession. It is survival. It is declaration. When you bind yourself, you are saying to the galaxy, I choose this one to fight beside, to stand with, to die for, if needed." He turned his head toward her. "And do you still want to die for me?" She blinked slowly. "No, I want to live for you. That is far more dangerous." He laughed. Just once, quiet but real. She moved closer. When her fingers brushed his, he didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his palm upward, letting her take it fully. Her claws grazed his calluses. Her pulse, stronger now, beat steady beneath her skin. She didn't tremble. Neither did he. "You are not mine to command, Dane Ryle," she said, "but I will protect you like my own skin. I will build with you, bleed beside you, burn for you if needed." He looked into her eyes, silver storms wrapped in flesh. "And I'll carry you again if it comes to that." She leaned in. Their foreheads touched. And there, in that silent collision of warmth and breath, the bond became real. Not because of tradition, not because of politics, but because both of them knew that in a universe built on war, two souls had collided by accident and chose not to undo it. The news traveled faster than light, faster than law. Across the 8 sectors of the Inner Reach, the story echoed in every channel, from merchant relays to pirate broadcasts. Queen Syraxa, last of the Dominion, had taken a human soldier as her mate. No royal court had seen such a pairing in recorded memory. Reactions burned like a wildfire on both sides. Some wept, others laughed, a few threatened war, but no one ignored it. The council, pressured by every allied system, convened to determine whether the right would stand. High priests argued bloodlines, military tacticians demanded sanctions. Even Earth's own delegation tried to spin it as a political compromise, a tool for galactic soft power. Dane didn't attend the meetings. He was too busy carrying crates of supplies into a joint aid clinic being rebuilt on the edge of the demilitarized zone. With Syraxa. They didn't say much those days. But their silence was never empty. He taught her how to brew coffee with too much sugar. She taught him how to cut wood using sonic tools that vaporized bark but not roots. He showed her the children who had grown up near artillery fire. She showed him how to command a battlefield with only a look. And slowly, painfully, their enemies ran out of reasons to stay enemies. Not because of treaties, because of them. One afternoon, while unloading food rations beside a repurposed troop transport, a former Threx general stepped forward. The man was missing 2 fingers and wore the scars of rebellion. He bowed low, not to Syraxa, not to her title, but to them together. "I thought it was weakness," the general said, "when you saved her. But now I see it was defiance. The kind none of us had the strength to try." Dane didn't reply. He just placed a crate into the man's arms. Then Syraxa stepped forward, placed her clawed hand on the general's shoulder, and said, "If you want to help rebuild, start by forgetting which side you bled for." That night they returned to their quarters. A simple room above the clinic, filled with half-broken tools, data pads full of news requests, and a small patch of dirt where they tried to grow something green. Dane lay on the cot, boots off, arms behind his head. Syraxa stood near the window, watching stars. "They will never accept us," she said. "They don't have to," he replied. "Just watch." She turned. In his hand, a sprout had finally broken the soil. A human seed, in alien dirt. Both of them smiled. And outside, the stars, bright and countless, bent gently around the planet they called home. A storm rolled across the horizon, electric pale blue, silent. On the plains beyond the Allied outpost, tall grass shimmered under its weight like a sea of whispering blades. Dane stood on the landing platform watching it, arms crossed, coat fluttering in the wind. It was the 3rd time this month that the Threx remnant had sent envoys demanding Queen Syraxa's return, branding her bond to a human as treason. Each time, she refused. Each time, they grew louder. But this time, they came in person. A battlecruiser landed 2 kilometers out. Black, spear-shaped, bristling with unaligned weapon signatures. The remnant called themselves True Blood, survivors of Syraxa's old regime who claimed she had been corrupted by her wound, by exile, by the human. They sent a message ahead. Return the queen, or we burn the earth that holds her. When Jiraxa read it, she said nothing for a long time. Then she turned to Dane and asked, "Will you let me fight again?" He looked at her across the room, hands buried in the sleeves of a coat worn smooth from work and wind. "You never needed my permission," he said. "I don't ask for permission," she replied. "I ask for balance." That word sat between them like something sacred. The next morning, she walked alone into the field between their camp and the incoming ship. No weapons, no armor, only the ceremonial cloak Dane had sewn from their wedding tent, a patchwork of 2 banners long abandoned. The remnant stepped out in black exoframes, armed and cold-eyed. Their leader, a warbringer named Thurn, drew a blade carved from the bones of fallen rulers. "You've shamed us," he snarled. "Chosen a creature who carried you like a servant." Jiraxa didn't flinch. "He carried me because I could not walk. You hunt me because you can't stand the thought of a queen who chooses instead of commands." They moved to surround her. And then Dane walked into the field. No armor, no gun, just his hands in his coat and a calm that radiated like gravity. "I'm not a king," he said. "I'm not even special. But I stood up once when no one else would, and I'll do it again." Thurn laughed. "You think we fear you, human?" "No," Jiraxa said, "but you remember me, and you know what happens when I am not merciful." The sky cracked above them. Stormlight ignited the grass, and for a heartbeat the galaxy paused. Then the remnant did the unthinkable. They bowed, not to her title, to them, to the choice. 10 years later, children played on the same field. They knew the names. They'd heard the stories. The human soldier who carried the enemy queen 60 miles through fire and ruin. The queen who laid down her crown for a mechanic's cot, a farmer's life, a peace that no treaty could write. Some called them legends. Others called them fools. But those who visited their garden saw something else entirely. It wasn't a grand palace or a marble shrine. It was a home, simple, sturdy, made of salvaged stone and alien steel. Vines wrapped its corners. Wind chimes spun softly in the breeze. Inside, Dane sat in a chair older than any of their wars. His hands were still strong, his beard silvered, his eyes slower but unchanged. He carved small wooden birds for the children who visited, teaching them how to balance shape and silence. And in the garden, Jiraxa tended the soil with hands that once commanded fleets. Her silver skin now lined with soft edges, her horns smoothed and adorned with beads crafted by tiny fingers. She smiled more now, not often, but truthfully. Every year the council invited them to speak. They declined every time. "Let them read," Dane would say, handing another bird to another child. "Our words aren't for podiums anymore." "Let them see," Jiraxa would add, "that what we chose didn't end in blood, but in roots." One evening, a young Threx girl asked them both, "Do you regret not going back to war?" Jiraxa stood, wiped dirt from her hands, and glanced at Dane. Then she knelt in front of the girl and whispered, "I carried war in my bones for too long, but he carried me, so I chose to carry life instead." That night, under a sky full of stars that neither side had ever claimed, Dane and Jiraxa sat by the fire. She leaned against him, claws brushing his hand. "Would you still carry me?" she asked, "if I broke again?" He smiled. "I never stopped." And beyond them, far from politics and memory, the galaxy moved on. But in one small corner of it, peace sat quietly beside a garden, held together by a human heart and the queen who chose it.